Hello everyone, and welcome to the Apps Associates webinar, The Cloud Mindset, Cloud as a New Way of Thinking About Implementations. My name is Julian Troke, and I'm the Marketing Director for Apps Associates, and I'm your host for this webinar. I'm joined by our speaker, Greg Bouchillon, who is the Cloud Practice Director at Apps Associates. But before I hand over to Greg, I want to let you know that you can ask questions at any time today using the chat window, and we'll answer all the questions we receive at the end of the presentation. I also wanted to let you know that we're going to be sending out a copy of the slides and a recording of this webinar to all attendees. And now it's my pleasure to hand over to our speaker today. Greg, over to you.
Thanks, Julian, and thank you all for joining us today. So our topic today is a cloud mindset. So I wanted to let you kind of understand where this came of. In many sales cycles and implementations and projects over the last 4 or 5 years, we've been faced with this idea of teams coming in that are used to waterfall method of implementations and starting with a blank whiteboard. And one of the challenges we always had with these teams was getting them out of the mindset of, well, this is the way we've always implemented projects. Why is cloud any different? So our webinar today is going to talk about why cloud is not just a technology, but it's a different mindset when dealing with implementations and implementation projects. So cloud's a mindset, not just a technology. So what do I mean by that? So first of all, let's talk about the technology. In the technology stack of it, you're going to rely on the vendor now. In our case, for example, would be Oracle for the purpose of Oracle Cloud, or it could be Salesforce for the purpose of Salesforce.com. For upgrades and patches, right? That's going to drive some of the challenges we have. New feature release timing, when you adopt and take on those new features, and also most importantly for documentation, right? So no longer are we writing massive amounts of documentation because we have to use the vendor documentation. You'll see why that is, why we're depending more and more on vendor documentation than on writing, help guides and job aids and things like that. We also have to focus on user adoption of modern best practices. So cloud vendors are spending millions and millions of dollars implementing modern best practice into these systems. And so we have to work on focusing and adopting these things. We have to get away from the mindset of, well, this is the way we've always done it. Another way of thinking about this is it's a terminology change. Now we personalize, we don't customize. So in the old methods of implementing software with frameworks, we started with this base out-of-the-box software, say e-business suite or PeopleSoft, and we said, tell me how you want the system to work, and I'm going to customize this whole platform, right? And the system was more of a framework. It wasn't really a complete application. Now they're complete applications, and now we personalize them. We make tweaks to them, but we don't customize the application out of the box. And the last thing to really bring up that we need to talk about is the change management is the key. So we're going to talk about change management a little bit here. So let me talk about a basic approach to how we do this. So the traditional waterfall approach was we took an application like, let's say, e-business suite. We were implementing sort of financials or human resources or even for sales. And we got into a room with a whiteboard that was empty, and we asked, what do you want to build? So it was a whiteboard wish list is what I always called it. And we customized the entire system to fit existing processes. So we weren't taking e-business suite or taking PeopleSoft and saying we're going to adopt this and use this application. We were taking it as a platform to build a customized application to fit the business requirements. This was expensive to implement, those e-business suite, those PeopleSoft implementations. They were 9 months, a year, 2 years. They were expensive. There were lots of resources taking up a conference room. There was a lot of high risk to that, a lot of user adoption challenges with those, right? Because it was, I'm building you something custom. This is kind of what you're telling me you want, but now I have to build you guides and training materials and all sorts of collateral around it so that you can adopt this new system I'm building for you, just custom building for you. The administration effort afterwards was incredible. So anytime, and especially as my next point after that is upgrade challenges. So anytime you'd upgrade, you'd have to go through and fully test to make sure nothing broke, right? So upgrades were challenges, and then just managing and administering this custom system was always just a challenge. It was expensive. It took resources on site. So how are we switching around? How are we doing this today? So when we go in, even in the sales cycle, when we're starting early on, before the implementation, we're talking about adopting modern best practices. The systems are built with modern best practices. They have them inherently in the system, and we're going to use those. So what we do is, instead of saying, what do you want, we say, what doesn't work? We demo the system as part of it, and I'll show a typical our cloud jump start methodology, that typical methodology. I'll show that in just a minute after this. We demo the system, and we say, here's how the system works. Here's how, for HR, you do acquire to retire. Here's how for financials, you do procure to pay. Here's how for sales, you do, opportunity to close. Tell me what doesn't work for you today. And if you approach it this way, you gain a lower cost of implementation because you're adopting out of the box, right? We all know adopting out of the box is the fastest way to get a live system stable. Lower risk, you're going to get better support from the vendors. So if you're not sitting there tweaking and customizing everything, when you have a problem and you need to talk to Oracle about it, Oracle is aware of it because it's their system, it's their base platform. The administration effort is much lower. You don't have a lot of odds and ends and parts and pieces now that you have to stay on top of. And of course, it allows the vendors who now in cloud are responsible for the upgrade to be able to do those upgrades without fear of breaking something, because they kind of constrain you into a system where now again, we're personalizing, we're not customizing. So let me talk about how this works in kind of an implementation. So this is Apps Associates Cloud Jumpstart methodology. I just threw this slide in here because I thought it would be a good example. So we break it down very simply into 4 sections: plan, design, validate, and deploy. And one of the first things a lot of people will notice here is there are not 10,000 deliverables in this. We only create deliverables, documentation, collateral that we need to. Otherwise, we rely on the vendor's documentation. So for plan, we validate project goals, objective scope. We validate our milestones. We build a project plan. We kick off the project. We schedule our workshops. Okay, the very simple outcome of this is a project plan and a team collaboration site. Every project needs those, right? But what you're not noticing here is we're not building 500 pages of traceability matrix and RACI diagrams and all sorts of what we typically would have had in an EBS. We're not dealing with 500 pages of documentation. Design is where our new methodology comes into play, right? So we start with a demo workshop, walk through the entire process. Here's how you hire an employee. Here's how you enter an opportunity. Here's how you enter an invoice. And we basically identify gaps that comes out of that. Well, when I enter an invoice, I also need to add this one piece of information. Okay, that's fine. We identify those gaps, but we're working from a baseline system here and building off gaps. From there, we configure the instance, and then one of the more important things, and we're going to talk about this in change management again, is you'll notice that right away we're conducting admin training and BI training, right away. So before we've even gotten into the testing cycle, which comes in the validation phase, we're already doing training. What's important here is that we're getting the users into the system early. Right? All of our team members that are part of the team, the project team, they're in the system within 2 to 3 weeks. Right? They're going to live, they're going to breathe in that system. We'll talk about why that's important coming up with change management. The outcome of this, again, like I said, no massive amounts of docs. There's training docs and admin guides, which are just collateral for the training on how to do different tasks. Most of those docs and those guides, by the way, point to links at docs.oracle.com. They point to links that say, here's where you go to get the steps on this. Why is that critical? Why is it critical that we're relying on the vendor documentation? Because when a new feature comes out, so release 11 is coming out, it's going to have new features. When a new feature comes out and some of those admin steps change, the vendors, Oracle, are keeping those docs up to date, right? So you don't have a user who is left with a doc that's out of date because we got a new release. Because what's also happening in cloud that's not happening in EBS, you're getting upgrades twice a year. Right? So it's important to be prepared for that, to be ready for that. Quickly, the last 2 things, validate. So we do several rounds of testing. We do it in kind of an agile time box methodology where we do some demonstration, we walk through, we test it, we note down some issues, we change it, we walk through, we test it again. So we keep doing this iteratively to continue to get better and better with the system. What it also does is it also makes the user stay in the system and work with the system. Again, we'll talk about that in change management. The outcome of the testing is test scripts and issues logs, right? You'll notice here it's not training manuals for end user training and things like that. That's not here. And then finally for deploy, we have the end user training, we configure production, we migrate over production, we get ready to go live, just like we would any other situation. So change management, I harp on this a couple of times here, so let's talk about this. So why is change management so important? We have to first get all of our team members out of the custom-build waterfall methodology mindset. So we start at Apps Associates literally from the first time we ever meet a customer and we talk about how we implement cloud. We talk about we need to change this mindset. We need to make sure everybody's aware that we're not custom building a solution here, that we're adopting modern best practices, which is going to reduce risk, increase user adoption, and allow us to rely on the vendor much more heavily than if we tried to custom build a solution. And the second thing is team members have to spend time in the system to reduce what I call user panic. So user panic is a term that I think all of us know what it is. It's when we get about 2 or 3 weeks before go live, and all of a sudden, team members start poking their heads up and start panicking, going, I can't do this, I'm not ready, I'm not in the system enough, I don't know enough about it, I don't feel comfortable enough. We've all been on projects that have been there. So that's why change management is so important. It's getting these team members ready so that they feel comfortable. So how is a team member comfortable? And it's when they've spent enough time in the system that they've hit problems on their own. Well, I imported these journal entries, but I got errors. But they've spent enough time to go figure out how to solve their errors. Oh, I've seen this problem before when I tried to hire somebody and I already know the solution to it. It's when they feel like they're comfortable enough that if errors or problems pop up, because that's what they're really afraid of, they can continue past them and work around them. So that's why change management is so important, spending so much time in the system there with that. And adoption today with cloud is the only path to success. So like I said, self-diagnosing, self-solving of issues, right? That's important. These guys have got to be ready for that. They've got to be able to feel like they're comfortable enough in the system that they can self-diagnose issues, they can solve issues, right? Because if we can't sit there and have a project that's 12, 16 weeks long to bring in an HR system or an ERP system, but then turn around and have to have 10 months of post-go live support. That's 3 or 4 times the price of the implementation, right? That doesn't gain us anything. So for adoption, the second thing is you also want to focus on benefit, excitement, and momentum. So what do I mean by that? We've all been in projects. People are nervous. How is this going to affect my job? How is this going to change the things I'm working on? The focus in change management should be on the benefits, getting the team members excited around the benefits of their jobs. Let's say they have processes that they've always had to manually do, and now they don't have to do that. Now we're using workflows to get approvals instead of somebody having to make a phone call or send a one-off email and tracking emails or attaching emails, right? So focus on benefit, excitement. How is this going to make your job better? Gather that momentum and keep that momentum going forward. And then finally, future phase enhancement participation. So what do I mean by this? So a lot of times we've gone through projects and someone says, well, I would like it to do this, I would like it to do this, and we parking lot that. We say, okay, great, that's a future phase, right? So what we have to get the team members doing is making sure that they're participating in, as you're going through this, team members, tell us what future things you think would be great. And then as they're live, not just going live and saying, okay, that's it, we're not meeting again. You set up user councils, user groups, so they can talk about issues they're hitting. They can talk about things they would like to see in the next phase, right? And keep excitement and momentum. Keep that buy-in using that. So the change management there is very important. And the end goal of all this, like I said, was to reduce go live support, right? Nobody wants to spend, you know, $200,000 on a system that they have to go put in, but then spend $600,000 for the next 2 years on managed services because they don't have anybody who can support it or they don't feel they can support it. It should not be that necessary. Ongoing work after any project should be enhancements. It should be another phases. It shouldn't be, I need somebody to help write a simple report, right? As part of our project, we train them on BI, right? We train them how to write their own reports. We train them to work with Oracle support. So if they're having problems writing a report, they can open a ticket and get help. They have access to documentations, right? So real ongoing maintenance after the system should be new features, acquisitions, changes, things like that. Critical, important things that happen, not the day-to-day activities that just need basic support. So how do we adopt the cloud? So here is my final part and piece to it. So this is what I tell all of my team members and my clients when they're first saying, how do we adopt the cloud? Plan for enough team member time before the project starts. So this is critical. So we talk about this all the time, and this is one I want to spend a little bit of time on. Everybody's got day jobs. Everybody has stuff they're working on. This project is going to take time out of everybody's schedule. So I was with a client one time who we were doing a payroll project. They knew there were weeks where there was going to be intensive payroll testing, and for those of you that have never been through a payroll project, and you're lucky if you've never been through a payroll project, because it is a demanding round of testing. You are doing parallel testing and making numbers line up to the pennies. You have to. But during that period, what we set up was we brought in temps to process their payroll while the actual payroll people were in testing and were working on this. This way we could make sure they could spend time in the system, because otherwise if they don't have that backstop, they don't spend enough time in the system, and then we get user panic, right? They do what's necessary. Oh, you just need me to test this. Okay, I tested. I'm done. Now leave me alone so I can go run my payroll. My day job is getting in the way. Now, I'm not saying everybody needs to do that and everybody can do it, but it's sharing the load, but it's being realistic up front about the amount of time. If you are already running a team with 2 outstanding recs and you already are trying to hire 2 people to do it, to just keep up the workload, you're going to have a real challenge through that project of being successful, of people spending enough time. It's just going to be, they just don't have time to do it. So plan for enough team member time before the project starts. Have those conversations early and have them often. Focus on the benefit of the solution, not the solution itself. So this is back to the change management a little bit too. So one project that I had that went sideways almost from the very beginning was we went into the project kickoff, and we were doing our spiel to all this group of users, this group of team members. There were about 15 of them on the phone. These were people that were going to be testing different parts and pieces. It was an HR project. So we had recruiters on the phone. We had HR reps all the way up to the vice president of HR. The challenge is when we came in there and we started talking about all the interesting, exciting things that were going to happen on this project and about how it was going to increase, you know, their speed, their accuracy, how we were going to put integrations in so they're not manually typing things and stuff like that. You know, we focused heavily on those benefits in that thing, and we took a team that wasn't very sure. We found this out later because it was kind of crickets on the phone call. But we had a team that was walking in saying, well, this isn't the solution we wanted. We didn't want this one. We wanted this other vendor. But because we were able to focus on the benefits, then they were able to see that the solution itself doesn't really matter if the benefits are there. So focus on the benefit of the solution. Challenge with that too is you're going to get the, well, this is the way we've always done it, right? So as part of adopting the modern best practices, you're going to have to spend time focusing on, is that the way we still should be doing it? Does that give us the maximum benefit? So focus on the benefit of the solution, not the solution itself. That's hard for a lot of guys to do. If you're the lead implementation consultant on an ERP project and you're working on a chart of accounts, sometimes the solution is everything to you in your head. So you have to have that team there to make sure you back up and help the team members focus on the benefits from adjusting a chart of accounts or the benefits of collecting certain data in your HR system. Next thing, there are many ways to solve a problem. So a lot of times we get in we're talking about, well, this is how we enter an invoice, and someone may say, well, I don't enter an invoice that way. I do it this way. I want to do it the same way I do it today. It's not possible with cloud. Again, we're not customizing the system. We're not creating screens. Now, we can add user-defined fields in. We can make certain fields required by doing personalizations. So we have a lot of power with things like that in Oracle Cloud, or if you're in Oracle Sales Cloud, you know, there's a lot of custom, personalizations you could do on the interface. But if it's a matter of, well, I want this screen before this screen, there are things we can't do. So how do we drive that best practice? So what I usually do is I push back in a way to dig into what's the problem. What is the problem with doing this? We always want to start with solutions, and every time we start with solution, that means we all agreed on what the problem is. Many ways to solve a problem. So I always give that spiel at the start of my projects to say, there are many ways to solve a problem. If you're coming out with solutions right away, let's all back up and make sure we understand what the problem is. So it's very important for everyone to understand we need to address the problems and not focus so much on the solution until we agree what the problem is. Fourth point, this one's always big. Be open to reviewing existing processes. So there's an old project management joke where a guy asks his mother every Thanksgiving, his mother takes their turkey, cuts off the end of the turkey, sticks it in the turkey pan, puts it in the oven. He gets to be an adult, he asks the mother and he says, why do you always cut off the end of the turkey before you put it in the turkey pan? And she says, I don't know, ask your grandmother. So he goes to his grandmother and he asks the question, goes, Mom always cuts the end of the turkey off before putting it in the turkey pan. Why do you, instead to ask you, why do you always cut the end of the turkey off before putting it in the turkey pan? And she just looks at him and says, because my turkey pan was never big enough for my turkey. Right? So it's the old project management adage of just because we've always done it this way doesn't mean we should. A lot of times, the reason we're doing it a certain way is because of a previous system. I can't count the number of times we've always done it this way because a previous system had restrictions that forced us to do it another way. So again, going back to focusing on the benefit of the solution, it's how about we get rid of those restrictions that you no longer have because we're implementing a new system. So it's very critical that everybody is open to reviewing processes, right? And so again, that's another conversation we have almost in our first meeting with our clients is, are you open to reviewing your existing processes? In different worlds, that's a little different, right? In some parts of HR, there are some processes that can be reviewed, some that can't, right? I-9s have to be filled out in 3 days, so we have legislative restrictions we have to do. ERP, financials, GAAP, IFRS, lots of restrictions. Sales usually is a little more open. They have a little more room for that, and they play with the process a lot more, is my experience too. So you do a lot more process changing in a sales implementation than you would do, say, maybe for an ERP implementation. But again, these tools have modern best practices built into them. The first thing we do is demo those best practices and ask what doesn't work, right? So it makes it easier to open that conversation about reviewing existing processes. The next one's important, empowering the team to be part of the change management process. It's easy to sit back and say, I don't like this. I want it a different way. But what you have to do is empower those individuals and those team members who might be resistant to change, empower them in the process, help them help you make the changes. Bring them to the table in all of the discussions. A lot of times what happens is we get, well, I want it this way, and then a developer may go away and come back and say, well, I can do it this way, will this work, right? That person's not part of the change management process. They're just a consumer at that point. They're not participating. So empowering individuals on the team to be part of the change management process is huge, right? It brings some skin to the game. It makes everybody responsible to everybody else to come up with the best solutions possible. So that's important with change management. Keeping the team members engaged, I've harped on this 3 or 4 times, but if you have a 12-week project, then for at least 9 of those weeks, your team members need to be spending half their time in that system, right, to be comfortable, to feel like they can handle themselves in that system, to feel like they don't need a 40-page manual next to them that lists every error code in the system, right? That was always the fallback with a customized solution. Okay, if you get this error code, go to this page in the manual and it's going to tell you how to fix it. That doesn't work anymore with cloud, right? Because things come up and could come up in the future, right? So you have to build confident team members who feel comfortable in the system. So spending time in those systems. So we were doing in a former life, I was doing an implementation project. It was a large HR system, big manufacturing client, and we had them in the system for most of the project, and we were engaging them every week. Are you in the system? How much time did you spend this week in the system? What did you find? And we had these weekly, basically, roundup meetings where we asked every one of them to come in and talk about things that they found in the system, right? So we made them accountable. We empowered them to be part of the team, and we made them accountable just showing up and participating and being in those systems and making sure that they were comfortable with it. And when we went live, they were. They felt good. Go-live support was pretty minimal when we brought that system live because those guys had seen everything. And they got to the point, too, where they would stop talking to us when they hit a problem and start talking to each other. When you get to the point where team members are solving each other's problems and they're not even going to the implementation team, you're ready. That's a great moment to get to. That's why user groups are very important to build. Identify technical scope that's unnecessary. So a lot of times there's, well, data conversion interfaces. I need this other interface. Well, let's talk about it. Is it actually that necessary for this? Is it a once-a-month interface that you're asking to be automated that we could possibly do just through file-based loader manually? That reduces testing time, it reduces development time, and it reduces a point of failure. And it also reduces something that somebody has to monitor. Data migration, every one of you who's been in a project has gone through the data migration discussion. Do we need to bring this much data? Right? You may be a financials company. You may be a controller in a team. Do you need the last 22 years of financials data? Well, no. Or, yes, we actually go through a lot of mergers and acquisitions, so we have to do it, and we have to create those reports. Okay, there's a reason for it. Let's do it. Well, let's push back on it. Do we need closed invoices, right? Do we need closed AP, closed POs? For HR, do we need to have every employee that's been employed by this company for 50 years? No, because we have 7 years that we need to go max, right? So identify that scope and be very cautious with what you bring in, right? The lower the scope you have, the better you can do. And it's systems today, it's not like we have to bring everything in phase 1. We can bring it in phase 2. The beauty about phase 2, so keep this in mind too, phase 1, no one's seen the system. They're learning the system. They're interacting with the system for the first time. They're uncomfortable. There's a lot of change management challenges. Phase 2, they live in that system. They know that system inside and out. They're much better consumers. The team members are much better consumers of the implementation in phase 2. You can do a lot more things a lot faster with a lot less risk in phase 2 than you could in phase 1. Phase 1 is change management. So anything you can push to phase 2 is always a huge leap. Finally, my last point to you guys is creating user groups. So create them early. I like to have kind of a readout call every week where I have all the team members on there, right? Because we have the implementation team, right? And we have a few members from the client side team, right? Those little status calls and stuff like that. Those are quick, those are fast, right? That's a PM, you know, and a couple of implementation guys. But having a readout call where you have everybody who's got their hands in this thing, right? Everybody who's going to be testing, everyone who's a business owner, who's a SME, who's a process owner, having them on a readout call every week to talk about where you are in the project, right? It's a great open line of communication. It lets you know you can give them updates on where things are at, and at the same time, you can make them give updates too. Did you work in the system this week? User groups are one extension from that. They're usually not run by the implementation team. They're run by a BA or, you know, a process lead or someone on the customer side. And the whole point is get together and talk about what problems you're having with the system, what challenges, and what new features you like, right? And document that comes out of that, right? A lot of times people will say things internally about a system that they're having challenges with or they're having problems with that they may not tell the implementation team. So user groups are great. And I always say do those 3-4 weeks before go live and keep them going after go live. It keeps a sense of consistency after that go live mark. So that's kind of my spiel across the thing. Let me give you guys 2 other pieces of things there. So a couple of kind of call to actions we have. So we'll be doing a couple of webinars this year. We're going to break up kind of the whole implementation process, and I'm going to kind of give some stories, I guess you could call it story time, webinars about things that go wrong in each kind of part of the cycle. So our first one is ways that cloud projects go wrong in the sales cycle. So you'll hear a lot of the same concepts I talk about here. I'll talk about sales cycles where the client was missing 3 resources and trying to hire for 3 resources, but wanted to push this software in for an artificial date, right? Well, when we went in, what happened on that was we delayed the project by 6 months, right? So I'm going to talk about ways that they go wrong. The first one's on the sales cycle. After that, it's going to be, I'm going to talk about the first kind of part of implementation, the second kind of part of implementation. Then I'm going to talk about post-go live. So it's about 4 webinars, how we're doing there. So that'll be coming out probably March 10th is the date we set for that. And then the other thing too is, if you're looking at cloud, if you're thinking about it, if you're talking about it, maybe you're already having conversations with Salesforce, you're having conversations with Oracle, and you're thinking about that, reach out to us. I've got a team of experts who can talk to you about all these things. Let's talk about the product offerings you're doing. Let's talk about phasing and timelines, and let's get some estimates together for scope and resource needs. Sometimes it's just a conversation. Hey, I just want to talk for an hour about things we're thinking about doing. Can you tell us what's going wrong? In fact, I had one of these earlier this week. I was talking to a client that is currently on Salesforce. They're looking to move to Sales Cloud, right? We do both. App Associates does both of those. And so we were talking about, some of the things they want to do next. We were talking about, well, you really need to decide on your data architecture, right? That was one of the challenges they were having. So we have these conversations all the time with people who are just looking to understand the pitfalls. The more planning we can do ahead of time, the more you're aware of resource needs, what timelines look like, what you've got to do, be open to reviewing the existing processes. The more you can have that ahead of time, the more successful the project is, and the more people are engaged and ready to go. It's when we go into this, well, we're just going to do cloud, we'll just throw it in and get it going because we've heard it does all this stuff. That's when there's a lot of surprises right about the kickoff meeting when they start seeing, well, wait a minute, I have to do all of this stuff too? Well, yes, you do. So it's your system. So that's my spiel for today. I'm going to hand it over to Julian to see if we had any questions come in.
Well, thank you, Greg. That was an excellent presentation. I'm sure that everyone appreciated that. And we've had a few questions come in. First one I'd like to tackle is 2 people have asked related questions here. So I'll kind of tie them together. You mentioned earlier that in order to be successful with a cloud migration project, you really need to get people spending time using the system long before you go live. So can you give an idea of what percentage of their time or how much time commitment a user would need to make as part of this kind of project?
So I'll give it in a little different terms than time commitment. Let's do it by type of a resource. So if you are an HR specialist and your job role entails entering hires, then we might say every week I want you to enter 10 new hires. What we often do is we'll say, hey, when you hire the people you're hiring today in your old system, we want you to go hire them again in the new system, right? Duplicate your work on both sides. If you're a finance invoice AP clerk, we may say we want you to enter 20 or 30 invoices, but we want you to use these different types of invoices. We want invoices for servers, multi-lines invoices, 3-way matches. We might give you a list of different ones we want you to do. So it could be everything from 4 or 5 hours a week to 10, 11 hours a week. But it's about processing the transactions. The more transactions we process, the more chances are we're going to have them hit something. Because what we're really driving them to do is to, 1, get comfortable moving through the screens, knowing where everything is. But 2, we want them to hit problems. We want them to if they're hiring someone at HR, accidentally forget to put the business unit in and go, well, why is none of my jobs coming up, right? We want them to hit that so then the next time they hit it, they know exactly what's wrong, right? So it's about transaction loads. A lot of times, too, if we have a good, large staff, so you have 3, 4, maybe 5 testers who are testing in an area, let's say it's HR, and you have a recruiter and you have an HR specialist, we may have the recruiter hire somebody and then pass over to the HR specialist to make sure that the interface ran through, and then have that HR specialist transfer somebody the next week, give them a pay raise the week after, terminate them the week after, rehire them a week later, right? So giving them scenarios and stuff like that. We have test scenarios too, the testing and things like that. We just don't want them saying, okay, I just run this list of scenarios one time through testing and I mark off what didn't work and we're good. We want them to keep processing those transactions to where it becomes second nature. So it can be as little as 3, 4, 5 hours a week. It can be as much as 10 to 15 hours per week, depending on what it looks like. We tailor it for everyone. So we try to, if you've got one payroll clerk in your entire company who has to run payroll for 6,000 people, number 1, you're way understaffed. Or number 2, we obviously can't expect that person to spend 20 hours a week in the system. But we do need them to process transactions of payroll, so we'll set up testing sessions. So hopefully that kind of answers the question.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And the related question is, is there any usage tracking to see who is using the system? And if so, what kind of things can you track that the user is doing in the system?
Well, so every time they complete a transaction, the system notes who makes the transaction. So there's audit reports, there's login reports, so we can write reports to see when's the last time somebody logged in, how many people are logged in. But look at the transactions. So if it's, again, let's go back to my AP clerk, how many invoices did they enter? How many people got hired by this specialist? How many transactions did this specialist make, right? These are stored in tables that we can pull from reports to count the number of people hired this week. I go into my readout call, I may be able to say, guys, I saw there were only 20 people hired this week and they were all done by so-and-so. Why are the rest of you not in the system, right? So it's very critical because as nice as it is at the end when they go, I'm not ready, being able to say that's because you spent no time in the system, that doesn't get us live or successful, right? We have to drive the change management to get live and successful, which means we have to be on top of that. So yeah, we do look at transactions usually as a big driver, how many transactions were completed.
Another question that came in was, is it better to do this kind of cloud migration project in phases or to do a big bang switchover?
It depends on the circumstance. Phases are always going to be easier. Remember what I was talking about too when I said that phase one has a ton of change management, phase two not so much, because phase two they're already in the system, they're already comfortable. There's other change management they have to do, obviously, with the new tools and but they're comfortable in the system. So phases, almost every one of my cloud projects are in phases. Now, I have some that are big bang, and the reason they are big bang is because we have a customer with an existing footprint that needs, so let's say it's an ERP customer that's on eBusiness Suite today, and they have financials, they have procurement, they have self-service procurement, they have procurement contracts, they have projects, right? We've got to load all of that up into phase one because they can't lose the functionality, right, if we're going to retire that other system. But generally, phases, especially if you're putting in new functionality, is always better. Get what you need in phase one and then grow. Remember, you're building a footprint in this system. You're not building an end-all system that you're not going to upgrade. You're building something that's going to get upgraded every 6 months and have new features every 6 months. And it's always going to be growing and expanding and doing amazing things. So, you know, don't feel like, well, we get to go live, that's it. Go live is just the start. It's just everybody in the system. After that, it's tons of stuff. Your user groups are developing new content that they want, new functionality, they want new reports, things like that.
So I just have two more questions that I wanted to go over with you. One is, you talked about at the beginning of the webinar, you talked about how it's now personalization, not customization, but one of the audience wants to know if you have to have a customization in the cloud system, how can you do that?
Okay, you can. So Oracle has a platform called PAAS, P-A-A-S, Platform as a Service. That's part of the Oracle Cloud offering. So let's give an example. Let's say you want to do contract authoring, and what you want is you want to build a tool with some special forms that people have to fill out, you know, with special information, and you just can't do it through personalization. You want to change the way the forms read, or these are going to be external forms you're going to give to vendors to do, and you're not going to put supplier portal in, right? And you just absolutely have to do a customization. You can actually use Oracle's PAAS product, again, P-A-A-S, Platform as a Service, and build out these customizations. And what you're finding too, what we're finding too, is a lot of companies are building pre-built customizations on Oracle PAAS to fill gaps. So one of the gaps we had for a long time was we didn't have order management. That comes out in 11. But there are PAAS products out there that do order management because that would have been a customization before release 11. Now it's not a customization. Now the best practice for order management is actually built in, but you can use PAAS for that. So there are ways to customize if you need to. We just want to make sure we avoid that unless we absolutely have to have it.
Okay, great. And here's the last question, and it's about integration between existing systems and the Oracle Cloud applications. On a scale of 1 to 10, how intense is the process of working through integrations with other applications?
Integrations are integrations. Everybody always felt like, well, if it's in the cloud, it's going to be harder. It's really not. You have the same web services. You have the same file-based loaders. You have open APIs that allow you, in this open architecture, to bring data in and out of the system. BI Publisher can output data out. You can use web services to put data up. HDL, which is the new HCM data load, allows you to put data in the system very easily. So it's every integration is just like integrations before. You've still got to build the connectors between them, and you've still got to build a system that you're going to monitor and maintain and error correct and stuff like that, just like you would a legacy on-premise application. But we have open architecture to be able to bring data in and out of the system. So the way I always tell people about it is, if I can get data in and out of the system that I'm talking to, I'm good, because I can get data in and out of Oracle Cloud or Salesforce with no problem. It just goes in and out. So it just brings its own risk to the project, like it always has, either on-prem or in the cloud. It brings a level of risk of, we have to have testing time, we have to test all these scenarios, we have to check for redundancies, and it creates a point of failure. So that's why we always want to just spend extra time in any project testing those integrations.
Okay, great, Greg. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate your presentation today and all the questions that you've addressed. So thank you, everybody, for attending today's webinar, and this concludes our prepared remarks.